Okay, so as I said, the goal of this review is really to go from 0 to a website. So go through the whole process of creating the website files, the structure. We'll create the setup on GitHub and then add some content to it. We'll add a little JavaScript and see how far we can get with like maybe some DOM and events and some other topics in there too. So I have here, see in front of me, I have my terminal here. I also have a page open to GitHub in the browser. So really you can start in a bunch of different ways. First, starting from scratch on a website, or like you're working on the final project or pre-work. One way would be just to simply go into find a place in your local directories where you want to start a project. So I have this study hall folder here that I'm going to use. I will do something like I'll make a folder first to put a bunch of stuff in. So I might call it my new website. Make directory allows me to create folders on the fly, and I can actually type ls and see, for instance, this actually ls lists everything in the current directory, study hall in this case, and my website is here listed here. So I can, now that I know this is actually in a subfolder of the folder I'm in, I can go ahead and cd into this. Also, please, if you have any questions or if I'm going too quickly or you want to review something I mentioned, please let me know. I can't see the cameras, but feel free to message me in the chat or just like cut me off.
How do you overlay your terminal over your like software? Like you
like this like cool transparent thing.
Yeah.
That
I see. Never mind. I'm sorry. I thought it was like all in one. Never mind.
Oh no, they're just like sitting on top of each other.
Okay,
Yeah, but because of the styling of this particular terminal, it's like slightly see-through. Yeah.
Okay.
So I have an empty folder here, and in the lessons we go through in the pre-work, we talk about how to build a basic website. It's basically 3 essential things you need for it. You need a HTML file. You need some kind of styling file. I mean, I guess it's not totally essential, but it's usually essential because HTML just isn't that fancy enough to be, it doesn't look very nice on its own. And then JavaScript, a JavaScript file that will allow us add some interactivity and just make it a little more of an interesting website, a little more modern than like late 1990s type stuff. So that means we need really 3 things in this folder. We'll do 3 files. First one we'll create is index.html. I'll go ahead and create a style file where we'll do some CSS, and then I will create a JavaScript file here too. Type ls, I can confirm everything's in here. Cool. So one thing I usually recommend is when you're first starting the project, as soon as you can, initialize it as a Git repository. So by making this project a repository, it actually can track all the changes you make in the work. And so as you build your project, you can actually sort of see a history of everything you do if you commit things throughout the process. So in this case, I want to initialize a Git folder repo for this folder, which we do that with git init. And it'll tell me, hey, I initialized this thing. Now, if I type ls-a, you can actually see now I have a .git folder in here. So that's the indication that this is a Git repository. I can also type git status, and it will tell me the current status of everything in this repository. So in this case, I just created these 3 things. And so it's recognizing, hey, we see you have untracked files. These 3, index.html, HTML, JS, and CSS. We see these are not tracked. Use git add to include them in what will be committed. So what this is essentially saying is that right now, whatever we do in here and any changes we've made, including creating these files, are not going to be in the repository in the history of Git until we stage them and commit them. So the way we stage them is through git add. So I'll do them individually in this case. Do git add index.html, git add index.js, one thing you might see that I'm doing while I'm typing, as I type commands, if I'm typing out a file name that exists in the current folder, in this case, these three things exist, I can press tab and it will, and bash will actually complete, or zish will complete that for me. So if it's like, oh, I recognize what you're trying to do, here's style.css. Makes it a little easier to add them all in. If I run git status again, it will now say, oh, hey, changes to be committed. It recognizes that these three files have been staged. I can unstage them. It gives me this option, which I don't really need to do, but it's saying like, okay, cool, these things are ready to be committed. So I'll just go ahead and my first commit, git commit -m first commit files created. Oh, I messed up. I missed cool. So created a git commit here with this message. By adding -m here, I'm saying in the command, I want to provide a message for this commit. If I don't add this, it'll open up a text editor, either VS Code, or that might actually open up in the terminal for me to try to get me to tell it what the message is for the commit. So this is just a little shorthand to make it a little easier. When you commit things, you'll see it'll recognize like, hey, three files are changed, and it created these three files. Those are the three changes here. One thing to note, whenever you're committing stuff, I can't commit again without any changes. So if I try this again, it's just like, hey, there's nothing here to change, because I haven't made I haven't made any changes, and I haven't staged them any changes either. So it's like, there's nothing to commit here. So it won't do anything. I'll push it up in a moment because I actually don't have anything anywhere to send it yet. So I'll just, but that's good enough. By just doing git commit, I can now see, for instance, if I do git log, all the commits, and this is the one I just created, first commit files created 64 seconds ago. Now I know that those three files are now part of the commit history of this project. As I go through and add more stuff, I'll continue to commit things, and a list of commits will become longer and longer. And sometimes later on, you'll work on projects that are like thousands of commits long. Cool. So that's a just brief overview of Git. We'll do the Git push in just a little bit. But right now, I'm more interested in maybe jumping into some code and setting up this website. So we have these three files here, and I want to start adding some stuff into them. So I'm going to then open them up in VS Code with code dot. So all these three files are blank. One thing that's really great about VS Code is that it recognizes, based on the file extension, like HTML, JS, CSS, it recognizes what type of file it is. And because of that, it gives you particularly some syntax highlighting, and also some like typo checking as well, grammar checking for you. So it will tell you if you do something messed up, it doesn't like, it'll actually give you like a squiggly line to tell you you've done something wrong. So that's one reason why we recommend VS Code. The very base of any website is always going to be an HTML file. Even later on in the course, when you're learning like React and building much more complex JavaScript-driven websites, at the very foundation of those sites, there's still an HTML file somewhere. That's just like the base, where that's what opens up when you first go to a website. And then from there, JavaScript takes over and does all kinds of crazy stuff. And all the modern websites you go to, that's what's happening. So again, as I said, though, we always have to start somewhere. This is where we start. I want to create a basic HTML structure. One of the shortcut I can show you right now is that if you are in a file that VS Code recognizes as an HTML file, there's some shortcuts provided for you, including this one, where you do exclamation point and then tab, and it will autocomplete a bunch of the document for you. So what it does is it basically just gives you the bare bones minimum valid HTML page. These ones are not totally critical, but they're recommended to include here. We don't really go over what this means in our pre-work, but yeah, you see the stuff that you've seen in pre-work: doc type, HTML. Then there's a head and a body, and a title tags here. So let's say, give it a new title. And I'll just indent it because I want to follow proper syntax here, instruction. Cool. Oh, that's not what I want to do. That's the wrong key. There we go. Cool. Any questions about that before I continue? Or about Git?
No, not yet.
Cool. Cool. So I have this very basic HTML site. There's nothing in it. Let's add something. Hello there. And now that I have this created, I can actually open this in the browser and check it out. I can open it in a few ways. I can actually go to, if I go to the context menu in VS Code by right-clicking or control-clicking on a Mac, and I go to Reveal in Finder, it actually will bring me to the site, to this actual project folder, and then I can open from here. I can double-click HTML and open it up. The other way is that since I'm in my folder here, I can just do open index.html, and it will also open up the site. If you are on a Windows computer, it's explorer.exe index. Oops, sorry. I'm on a new keyboard. I'm getting used to it. Index.html. That works in the same way. But anyway, so I have my page open. I can see, hey, that's the stuff I just wrote. While I'm here, it's always good to, while you're developing stuff, to go ahead and open up the dev tools in Chrome. So from here, I can actually see the browser version of my HTML code. This is what we just wrote in VS Code. So there's a hello there. But this is actually what happens. The browser reads that file, index.html, and it puts it into what's called the document object model, which is this. This is a representation of that code, but it's actually like the live representation in this case, which is cool. It means we can do all kinds of stuff in here. We can actually like edit things in the DOM live, and it will update here in the page. This won't persist. So if I refresh this page, it's going to go back to the original version of this file and say, because this is what's actually in the index.html file. But this is a cool little like way to explore HTML in any website you want to. One thing that's also very handy is we'll eventually start using JavaScript to interact with these things and go and grab specific things in here. So basic review of this stuff here. But that's all working. So I'm going to go back to my code. So I have my HTML file. It's loaded up and it's working. I now want to maybe connect these two files here. Actually, you know what? What I will really do is I'll follow proper Git habits, and I've created this content, so I'll go ahead and commit this. You can commit this here. Add index.html.
One question.
Yes.
So I've been using the terminal in VS Code to do like my commits and run my npm test and npm install.
Yeah.
And navigate. Is it any different from using the regular terminal?
No, and actually it should. I mean, there are some features in here that depends on what you set here, but like by default, it should be the same terminal and should load the same content as this terminal. So like. Okay. You can see that you can customize your prompt. In this case, I have a custom prompt and it shows up in both because it just loads up the same stuff. It would change if you have some other shell here. That can be one reason why it might not be exactly the same. But yeah, this is totally fine. And yeah, you can switch back, which you can do whatever you feel comfortable with. All the commands will work in both. One other thing I wanted to show you though too is that you can do all these commands, like these Git commands. VS Code does provide you a whole window pane over here that lets you do all the same stuff, but visually. I do encourage you to get used to using the commands in the terminal, but if you're ever curious and like need another way of sort of seeing what happens with the Git process, here I just ran git add index.html, and it recognizes in VS Code that I've staged, let me make this a little bigger. I've staged the changes for this file. I can actually undo my stage by doing this minus sign, and it'll move it. Now it says, hey, this change is recognized in this file, and I can click on it and actually see the changes it recognizes. It says it sees on the left there was nothing here, and now there's a bunch of stuff. Those are the changes it recognizes. Now I can run git add index.html again, or I can hit this plus sign and stage that file. Now that it's staged, I can do the commit command over here, git commit, as I said, or I can commit up here. So add index.html content, basic content, and hit check. And now the changes have disappeared because there's no new changes recognized on this repository. If I go back to here and run git log, I'll now see that that commit I just made on VS Code is showing up here in the list. So just a way to show you that this is these tools are just doing the same things that you're doing in the terminal, and VS Code is basically all-in-one thing that will help you do a lot of these things, including providing its own terminal, but you can do it a bunch of different ways. Okay, cool. So I've now committed these changes, and I'm in a good space for the HTML to working fine. I want to connect these two files. Can anyone tell me how I load in a style sheet into my HTML file?
From the head,
Yep.
the bottom of the head.
Yeah, it can go anywhere, but they do get read in order. That's the only thing you want to keep in mind. But yeah, it can go right here. And what is it that we have to put in here?
Style and brackets, or in the.
Yeah, you could do that, and then you could do stuff style in here. That's fine.
Oh, okay, never mind.
But in terms of loading up a separate file,
is it href?
Href is a good guess, actually, and I think that might even be part of it. But I'll tell you honestly, I've been programming for a number of years. I still forget how to structure this, and so this is one thing I am like, how do I link a CSS file to HTML? And it's totally okay to do this. You don't have to memorize everything. Let's see. Usually there's a pretty good one here. W3 Schools is actually pretty good for just giving you exactly what you need. Like, hey, this is, if I can scroll down, there we go. Let's see, link. Here it is. So yeah, href was right. You have to provide a link. Provide an href, which is the location of the link. In this case, the default that I copied and pasted this, so I have to change the name to the correct name so that it connects to this file. And I need to tell it it's a style sheet. This type is actually shouldn't matter, but it is certainly good to keep like accurate details. Like this is a CSS file, so that's fine. Now that I've put that in here, I'll save it. And I'll add some kind of, maybe I'll add something here. Let's see. Let's test out the CSS by changing the background to blue. Go back to my website, refresh the page. It's blue. It's a little not distinguishable enough. I'll make it very blue. Very blue. Cool. So that tells me, because I'm setting this rule inside of the CSS file, that this link is working properly. So CSS, just as a quick review, stands for cascading style sheets. It's really what allows us to make the websites look nice and much cooler than the very basic kind of stuff we saw, or we actually are seeing right now, which is this. HTML elements do come with their own styling. So if I write like an H1 tag here, and I refresh this, there is some styling applied to this by default. Let's see if we can actually see it. If I click on this and I bring up my dev tools, it actually tells me what styles apply to this H1. Sorry, did someone have a question? Oh. It's like, hey, this is an H1. I didn't set any of these rules, but it's H1 by default is a block display, and it has a font size of 2em. So it's like actually 2em is 2 times the basic width of a character. So it's twice as wide, twice as big. It has some basic margin stuff, and it's set to bold. So like without doing any styling, there's some stuff here already that HTML will do for me, but it's pretty basic. So we can do other things to it by overriding those behaviors. So we can actually say things like, I don't want font size to be 2em. I'll even copy this and paste it in. I want it to be 4em. Refresh the page. Now it's 4 times the size. And you can even see it recognizes that the default behavior is being overridden. It's crossed out because this new rule is now in place for 4em. So the DevTools, again, can give you a really nice detailed look at like what's going on here. And in this case, you can see, you can write a whole bunch. You can actually see a whole cascade of rules being applied to this one thing. So let's try another one, for instance. If we had this H1, if we gave it like a class name, let's say we had some other H1s here, H2 or another header. And we gave this one the same class name. So we have, right now we have a style that's applying to H1, but nothing that's applying to H2. So if I look at the website, I'll see, hey, there's my H2 and there's my H1. H1 is still being applied with the extra large size. But I can do things like apply a rule to that class I just defined called header and apply it to both. So let's see, what rule should we apply? Maybe color should be red. Refresh the page. Now both of them will be red because both of them have this rule is applying to both of them, but this rule is only applying to H1. Does that make sense? Do y'all have any questions about CSS?
That makes sense.
Cool. Let me check and see. Joe, yes, I'm going to try to see if we can get over to that after this. We'll turn it over and we can talk about whatever labs you might have. So we'll talk about the objects lab. There is also a video I can share out too from previous study hall about objects. Okay, cool. So I won't go too much further into CSS, but that's the basic structure of it. You can apply these rules with this kind of syntax to either elements or to classes or IDs and give your HTML a little bit of a nicer style. Cool. The next thing is we want to connect this JavaScript, and that's really like where the fun of websites is because JavaScript allows us to do all kinds of stuff. So what we want to do is we want code in this file, in this JavaScript file, to run when we open this HTML file. You can do this a bunch of different ways. The sort of old practice, and I'll show you this first, and I think that's actually the way we do show you in this initial course, is to declare a script tag at the end of the page in the body. Can anyone take a guess as to why we run it at the end here?
Does it take the information from the HTML first, then apply all the JavaScript after?
Yeah, well, I think what you're saying, yeah, I think you're right. What happens is when a browser reads this page, it reads it line by line, So it loads, so the first line is doc type, and it's, okay, cool, this is the HTML page, gets the HTML, expects that, it goes to the header, gets to the body, it loads all of these things into this DOM one at a time. It gets to line 11, it loads this first H1, it gets to line 13, it loads this H2, and then it gets to 14 and it loads the script in here. The reason why it's important to have this here, or we'll show you some other options in a moment, is because if I have code here that's referencing stuff in this DOM, it needs to be loaded up. If the script runs and I have, let's see, I have an H3, this script will not be able to access this H3 because it runs after the script. So just to show you how that works, we'll do some quick query selectors and confirm that everything's working. So let's see if we can try and grab this H1 using JavaScript. So in JavaScript, just a quick review, we have a couple of variables we can use to store values. The one we tend to default to is const. Const is immutable variable. It's one that you can set, and you know you're going to set it as one thing and not change it to anything else again. So in this case, I want to go grab something off of in our DOM in HTML here through code, and I don't really want to do anything else with it. I don't want to reset a variable here. I just want to get it and store it for a second. So I'm going to use a const, and I'll call it something that's useful. So in this case, I'm saying I'm trying to get this thing in code. So we'll say const header 1. Maybe that's a descriptive enough. That's how you declare a variable, but I have to assign it to something. So can anyone tell me how to select an element using JavaScript? There are a few ways. The most common way is to use document query selector. There's a bunch of I shouldn't say that. It's not the most common way. It's just one of the few ways you can do it. This is the sort of generic way because it will take a bunch of different options. In this case, it always takes a string. So the string here, and it takes then either an element name or a class or an ID. So for instance, here, if I want to go after this H1 here, I can type H1. What this code will do is it will declare a variable named header1 and assign it to this element here. Then just to confirm, what we can do immediately is console.log this thing. And because it's loaded up in our HTML, if I go to the browser and I run this, refresh it, there's a third header I added, but if I now in the dev tools again, oops, we go to the console, I now actually am logging that thing. Hey, it's the H1. This, just to confirm too, for clarity, H1 log, refresh this, go back over here, rerun the page, H1 log, this thing. So when I'm logging here on line 3, header one is a variable, but it actually represents, it's being currently storing this element H1. And because this is a DOM element, JavaScript can do things to this. It can access attributes on it. It can also modify attributes on it and change things. So if I, for instance, wanted to change like a style, for instance, header1, I could say .style.color equals blue. Save that, go back to the file and refresh this. Now it changed to blue. If you notice, CSS is still red, and that rule is still applying. And now let's see what happens if I click on this and I check out. the CSS rules down here, we can see what we talked about before. H1, the default rules are here. The default size has been overridden by our rule. And then this class is being applied to it red, but it's also crossed out because we just ran some code that turned it to blue. So by default, this is red, but then the code comes in and changes it. So, do anyone have any questions about that? I'm going to go over that again. No? Okay. Silence. I assume everyone totally understands this and is feeling great. So just again, yeah. So this is, I'm logging this here. I have this attribute. The dev console is very friendly, and it's like, hey, we recognize that you're logging an element, so we're going to output it in the same way that it looks in here. It's the same thing. It recognizes that. So as I said, you can change stuff by accessing it with a DOM selection and then modifying it with commands in JavaScript. So we could do other things. For instance, we could do a header one dot inner text is equal to study hall. I refresh it. It's now actually taking the text that's still in here to start hello there and overriding it in the code. So that's actually like, I have everything I need. I've hooked up my JavaScript and my CSS. Oh, I actually want to go back a minute. I was talking about this script tag. So as I mentioned, I've been accessing this H1 in the code from the code that runs here. Here, if I try to access this third header, for instance, if I just make this an H3, and I refresh this page, it's gonna give me an error. And this error is like, hey, cannot read property style of null. Well, and on line 3, it's actually telling me exactly where it's going wrong. Line 3, it's saying this error is telling me cannot read property style of null. It's seeing that this is actually in the code right now is null, and that style doesn't work. It doesn't know what to do with it because it's like you're just trying to do something on top of a null value. Because this didn't actually return anything, H3 is not available yet. The one way you can get around this and put your script tag anywhere, there's a few ways. You'll learn about setting up the event way, but there's a more modern HTML way, which would be you can put it in the head and add defer to the script tag as an attribute. Now, if I go back to the browser and I refresh, it didn't give me an error. And if you notice, because now I'm selecting the H3 and I'm changing, even though it's still called header 1, I'm changing this value style color to blue. It's changed the third header to blue. Does that sound reasonable?
Sure.
Cool. Great. All right. So I want to do one more thing, which is basically finish off so that we have a website here. This is all you need. I mean, obviously it's a pretty simple website and there's not too much in it. So we want to take time. If I wanted to actually build out like a personal site, I'd go through and add actual content in here, add images and stuff. For the purposes of this exercise, I really just want to show you the whole process. So now that I have all this stuff in here, I can now, well, one thing I want to do is commit all the changes I've made. So I save them to our Git repository. And then I want to send it to GitHub and publish this site on the internet. So here I have, again, I mentioned I have this source control tab over here that you can get to, and it recognizes that right now there's 3 files that have been changed, and the changes are not being tracked. So I will track them and stage them, or they'll be not being staged. So I'll stage them by adding them. In this case, I can actually be, because of this user interface, I can be a little granular. I can say, okay, I'm staging the HTML, add HTML content. So I'll go ahead and commit that one. Add basic JS file. Go ahead and commit CSS. You don't have to do this, but it is good practice to get into it when you're in like a professional environment. Sometimes commits generally you want to be very small and very specific to what they're doing. Add basic style. Cool. I've committed everything in here, and now if I go ahead and I can confirm that with git log. Here's all of my git commits. Now it's time to go over to GitHub and create my website. So in GitHub here, to create a new site, you click on this plus sign and hit new repository. I'm the owner, so I'll just keep that. I'll give it a good name. My new website. Oh, I guess it wasn't as good of a name. It's pretty generic, I guess. My very new website. And I'll keep it public. I don't have to add anything here. Everything I want in this repository is locally already ready to go. I just need to create a place to put it on GitHub. So I'll create this repo. And because I just started with an empty repository, it comes with this page where it's like, hey, we recognize here's the connection to this repo. And here's some suggested commands. You notice actually we've run a bunch of these commands already. We've done git init, we've done add, we've made a few commits at this point. So the last things we want to probably do are these three here. If I run git branch, it will tell me what branch I'm currently on. By default, right now, I'm creating stuff on a master branch in my local Git version system. GitHub has changed recently to be using main as their default. Either one is fine, but because they use main as their default going forward, they recommend you switch over to that branch, which is totally fine with me. So I'm going to copy that command and run it. And now if I run git branch again, it's going to show me I'm on main, and that's the official branch that I'm using. Now I have these next two commands. This next command, git remote add origin. What this does is adds this remote repository, my very new website, to this local repository by connecting it. So if I, for instance, ran git remote -v right now, I don't get anything back because this repository, this is the command to check and see what's connected to it. It doesn't have anything connected. If I now run this command that I've copied here, and I go back and run git remote -v again, it will tell me, hey, origin is now github.com. There's my account and my new website name .git. So what this command is doing is, hey, it's remote. It's adding a remote called origin. That's this thing here. And it's giving it the actual remote address, which is this repository. So now that I've added this and I have everything committed and ready to go, I should be able to run that final command that they give us, git push -u origin main. It will tell me a bunch of stuff, hopefully. It usually takes a lot less time than this. Oh, there, cool. So this is a good sign. It's telling me it's going through a bunch of stuff. It wrote a bunch of objects, and then it pushed this new branch main to main branch, and so everything looks good to me. I can always confirm that if I go to GitHub and I refresh my page, I now have my remote repository with all of my commits I just made locally. You can see them. You can click here and see all the ones I've been doing here. So hey, I now have all of that work I did locally stored on my remote GitHub account. I can go to this repo wherever I am on a different computer or from a different place entirely, and get to it and get to these files. So pretty cool, and it's totally free, which is awesome. The final thing to do is to make this into a website. So to do that, now that we have all the stuff we need, and we know that it's running locally on here, this is the current state of it. Not great, but hey, it works. All I should have to do is go to settings, scroll down in settings, and where it says GitHub pages, I'm going to select the branch I just created, main, hit save, and it'll say, hey, GitHub pages source saved. If I scroll down again, it'll say your site is ready to be published at here. Now, if I click this, it probably won't be ready yet. Yep. So, but you can see here, it's actually a slightly different URL. There's my account name at github.io/ the name of my repository. We'll give it a few moments to load up. It usually takes like 5 to 10 minutes at most. So in the meantime, what questions do you have about that process? Nothing?
I think I would have to try it first on my own and to figure out where I would.
Sure, of course. Yeah. Yeah, this is like, I mean, just to show you the process, and that's definitely the best way to learn it is to just go do the same thing. And once you do it a few times, it'll start to become like clockwork. You'll realize how it works. This is still not loading. Okay. One thing that's also kind of cool about this setup is that, like, because this is actually reading, once it loads, it's reading from the repo. If I make changes and push them up here again, they'll actually automatically make their way up to this site. It'll again take a little while to load, usually does, but it will eventually load up. So while we're waiting for that, we can talk about JavaScript. Let me get my JavaScript stuff out here again. Okay, Joe, you had sent a message. You're asking about the objects lab. Was there something in particular you're curious about, or?
Hey, yeah. So can you hear me? Okay.
Yeah, I can hear you. Yeah.
Cool. So well, I'm a little caught up in my head because running the npm test on it on the very first test, the very first one, referring to updating the key and the value and everything.
Mm-hmm.
I'm able to get it to pass the modify the original employee, or does not modify the original employee, but I'm stuck on how to get the other one to pass on that. And then at one point I got the other one to pass, but it took that one out of passing, and now I can't get back to that. I think I'm caught up in my head at this point.
Sure. Yeah.
So I could share. I have it passing the does not modify right now.
Okay. Yeah. Let me stop sharing my screen. Yeah, if you want to share your screen, we can take a look at that.
Cool. This will be the first time I've done that. So let me see.